I stood at the edge of the canyon with my suitcase in one hand and a fear so heavy I could barely breathe. 53 years old, and this was the first time I had ever traveled alone. My daughter thought I was losing my mind. My friends said I was being reckless. But none of them understood that staying home had become more terrifying than leaving. For decades, I had built my life around other people's needs. My husband's career, my children's schedules, my mother's declining health. I became so good at disappearing into their lives that I forgot I had one of my own. When my husband passed and the kids moved away, the house became so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the walls. I realized I didn't know I was without someone needing me. So I bought a ticket to a place I couldn't pronounce, packed a bag, and walked out the door before courage could abandon me. My name is Margaret, though most people called me Maggie when they remembered to call me anything at all. I turned 53 the week before I left, and I spent that birthday the same way I had spent the last 30. Baking a cake no one asked for and eating a slice alone at the kitchen table while the television hummed in the background. The house felt enormous without David. He had been gone for 8 months, and I still set 2 coffee cups on the counter every morning before remembering. The habit of him lingered in every corner. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. His jacket still hung by the door. I kept them there because removing them felt like erasing proof that I had once been part of something larger than myself. I had been a wife for 29 years and a mother for 26. Those roles had defined me so completely that when they began to fade, I felt myself fading with them. My daughter Emma lived 3 states away with her own family now. She called every Sunday, but the conversations felt like obligations we both endured politely. My son Jacob barely called at all. He was busy, always busy, building the life I had once encouraged him to chase. I told myself I was proud. I told myself this was what good parenting looked like, raising children who no longer needed you. But late at night, when the silence pressed against my chest, I wondered if I had done my job too well. David and I had dreamed of traveling once the kids were grown. We kept a folder of magazine clippings, pictures of mountain villages and coastal towns and cities we could barely pronounce. But retirement came and went, and we never left. First it was his job, then it was my mother's illness, then it was the grandchildren we were supposed to help raise. The folder stayed tucked in the bottom drawer, and eventually we stopped talking about it. Then one morning David collapsed in the garden, and all those some days became nevers. After the funeral, people kept telling me to take my time, to grieve slowly, to be gentle with myself. But what they meant was stay small, stay quiet, stay exactly where you are. So I did. I kept his routines. I watched his shows. I watered his tomato plants even though I hated tomatoes. I moved through the house like a ghost haunting her own life, and everyone seemed relieved that I was handling it so well. But I was not handling it well. I was disappearing. The morning light came through the kitchen window in thin slices, catching dust particles that floated like tiny planets in their own small universe. I sat there most mornings with my hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had grown cold, staring at the empty chair across from me. The chair where David used to sit and read the newspaper, rustling the pages in that particular way that used to annoy me. Now I would have given anything to hear that sound again. The house remembered him better than I did sometimes. It held echoes of his footsteps, the ghost of his cologne in the closet, the dent in the couch cushion where he always sat. I tried to fill my days with purpose. I volunteered at the library on Tuesdays. I attended a book club on Thursdays where we rarely discussed books. I gardened, though I had no talent for it. I cooked elaborate meals and then ate them standing over the sink, because sitting at the table alone felt too formal, too much like admitting something I was not ready to face. My friends invited me to dinners and movies, but their pity hung in the air between us like smoke. They meant well, but kindness delivered with sad eyes only made me feel more invisible. If you have ever felt invisible in your own life, comment below, and let me know where you are watching from. Sometimes knowing you are not alone makes all the difference. Do not forget to subscribe because this story is just beginning, and I promise you, it gets better. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn. The grocery store was unusually crowded, and I had to navigate around shopping carts and families debating between brand names. I stood in the cereal aisle for what must have been 15 minutes, staring at rows of colorful boxes, and I realized I did not know what I liked anymore. I knew David preferred the bran flakes because of his cholesterol. I knew Emma loved the chocolate puffs as a child and Jacob would only eat the ones shaped like little O's. But when I tried to remember the last time I had chosen something just for myself, my mind went blank. It was such a small thing, such a stupid thing to get emotional about. But standing there under the fluorescent lights with my empty cart, I felt the weight of every choice I had made for someone else pressing down on my chest. I left the store without buying anything. I sat in my car in the parking lot and watched people load groceries into their trunks, watched mothers buckle children into car seats, watched an elderly couple hold hands as they shuffled toward the entrance. The world was moving forward, and I was stuck in place, a woman who did not even know what cereal she liked. That night, I opened the folder David and I had kept for years. The one stuffed with travel brochures and magazine clippings, the one that represented all the dreams we had postponed until later. Later never came for David, and I was beginning to understand it might never come for me either if I kept waiting for permission to live. I spread the clippings across the kitchen table and looked at photographs of places I had only imagined. Mountains that touched clouds, oceans that stretched beyond sight, cities with names I could not pronounce, and canyons, vast and red and ancient, carved by forces too patient and persistent to give up. I ran my fingers over a photograph of a canyon at sunrise, all red rock and endless sky, and something inside me cracked open. Not in a painful way, but in the way a seed cracks before it grows. I thought about David, about how much he would have loved to see these places. And then I thought about how much I wanted to see them too, not for him, not for anyone else, just for me. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and before I could talk myself out of it, I opened my laptop and started searching for flights. The internet was full of warnings, articles about women traveling alone, especially women my age, warnings about safety and scams, and all the terrible things that could happen when you ventured out in the world unprotected. But I had spent my entire life being safe, following rules, staying small, and it had left me hollow. So I ignored the warnings and booked a ticket. My hands shook as I entered my credit card information. The confirmation email felt like a pact I had made with a version of myself I did not quite know yet. When I told Emma, I expected concern but not the silence that stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had that tight quality that meant she was choosing her words carefully. She said I was being impulsive. She said I was not thinking clearly. She said grief was making me irrational and that I should wait, maybe go with a tour group, maybe take a friend. She used the same measured tone I had used on her when she was 16 and wanted to do something I thought was foolish. The roles had reversed, and I had become the child who needed guidance. It stung more than I expected. Jacob did not even call back when I left him a message. I told myself he was busy, but the silence felt louder than any argument. My friends were polite but worried. They suggested therapy instead of travel. They reminded me that healing takes time. What they did not understand was that I had been taking time for 8 months, and all it had done was make me smaller. I was not running away from grief. I was running towards something I could not name yet, but desperately needed to find. 2 weeks later, I stood in my driveway at dawn with a single suitcase and a taxi idling at the curb. The morning air smelled like wet leaves and coming winter. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was retrieving her newspaper and paused to stare at me with open curiosity. I waved, and she waved back hesitantly, probably wondering where the quiet widow was going at 6 in the morning. I climbed into the taxi before I could change my mind, and as we pulled away from the house, I watched it shrink in the rearview mirror until it was just another house on just another street. The airport was overwhelming. It had been years since I had flown, and never alone. Families rushed past me with screaming children and overloaded carts. Businessmen barked into phones about meetings and deadlines. Couples held hands and laughed about gate changes and lost luggage. I felt small and out of place, like I was wearing a costume in someone else's play. I had flown before, of course, but always with David, always with someone else navigating and deciding and leading. This time every choice was mine, and the weight of that freedom was crushing. Security took forever. I fumbled with my shoes and my jacket and my laptop, feeling the impatient energy of the people behind me in line. The TSA agent looked at my boarding pass and my driver's license and asked if I was traveling alone. When I said yes, she nodded with an expression I could not read. Pity maybe, or respect, or just the blank efficiency of someone who had seen thousands of passengers and stopped registering them as individuals. I found my gate and sat in the hard plastic chairs and watched planes take off through the floor to ceiling windows. They looked graceful from here, those massive machines lifting into the sky like it was the easiest thing in the world. I almost turned back. I almost gathered my things and walked out of the airport and took a taxi home and pretended this whole thing had been a brief moment of madness that I had wisely overcome. No one would blame me. People would probably be relieved. I could return to my quiet house and my quiet life and the slow, comfortable suffocation of routine. But then I thought about the cereal aisle, about standing frozen because I did not even know what I liked anymore, about becoming so good at disappearing that I had vanished completely. And I thought about David, about how he died without seeing any of the places in that folder, and how if I got off this plane I would die the same way. Not physically maybe, but in every way that mattered. So when they called my boarding group, I stood up. My legs felt weak and my hands were shaking, but I walked down the jetway and found my seat and buckled myself in. The teenager next to me never looked up from his phone. The businessman on my other side fell asleep before we even pushed back from the gate. I pressed my forehead against the cold window and watched the ground crew loading luggage and directing the plane. And when we started moving, I closed my eyes and focused on breathing. The plane lifted into the sky, and my stomach dropped with the altitude. I opened my eyes and watched shrink below me. Houses became toys, roads became threads. Entire neighborhoods disappeared into patches of green and brown. We climbed through clouds, and for a few minutes everything outside the window was white and soft and impossible to navigate. Then we broke through into sunlight, into a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and I started crying. Not sad tears, not scared tears, but something else entirely. Relief maybe, or release, or the simple overwhelming fact that I had actually done it. I had left. I was in the air, suspended between who I had been and who I might become. And for the first time in 8 months the future felt like something more than just empty days to endure. The flight was long. I tried to read but could not focus. I tried to sleep but my mind raced too fast. I watched a movie on the tiny screen without absorbing the plot. Mostly I stared out the window and watched the country pass beneath me. Mountains and rivers and deserts and cities, all of it looking so small and manageable from this height. I wondered how many people down there felt trapped in their own lives. I wondered how many of them would ever be brave enough to leave. When we landed, the air was different, dry and warm and smelling like dust and sage. I collected my suitcase from baggage claim and walked outside into bright afternoon sunlight that felt nothing like home. The heat pressed against my skin. The sky stretched wider than any sky I had ever seen. I stood on the curb with my hands shading my eyes, and for the first time in years, no one was waiting for me. No one needed me to drive them anywhere or make them dinner or ask about their day. I was terrifyingly, wonderfully alone. I had booked a small guest house on the edge of a national park, the kind of place that catered to hikers and retirees traveling in RVs. The taxi driver who picked me up was a man in his 70s who talked the entire drive about the weather and the tourists and the best trails for someone my age. I let his words wash over me without really listening, too focused on the landscape rolling past the window. Red rocks rose from the earth like ancient monuments. The vegetation was sparse and strange, nothing like the green I was used to. Everything felt foreign and beautiful and slightly unreal. The guest house was small and clean, run by a woman in her 60s named Clara, who greeted me with the kind of knowing smile that made me think she had seen plenty of women like me pass through. She showed me to my room without asking questions I was not ready to answer. The room was simple, a bed with a colorful quilt, a dresser, a chair by the window, and a painting of wildflowers on the wall. The window looked out onto red rock formations that glowed in late afternoon light like they were lit from within. Clara told me breakfast was at 7 and that the canyon trails opened at sunrise. She asked if I had hiking boots, and when I showed her my sneakers, she did not laugh but did suggest I stop by the outfitter in town. Then she left me alone, and I sat on the edge of the bed in this strange room in this strange place, and I felt more myself than I had in years. That first night, sleep came in fragments. I lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to unfamiliar sounds, wind moving through the canyon with a sound like breathing, a dog barking somewhere far away, the hum of the air conditioning unit cycling on and off, The mattress was firmer than mine at home. The pillows smelled like lavender detergent. Every few hours I woke and forgot where I was, and then remembered, and the remembering felt like waking up twice. I thought about David. About what he would think of me being here. Part of me believed he would be proud. Another part worried he would think I was running away. Maybe I was. Maybe running toward yourself and running away from your old life are the same thing, and the only difference is what you call it after. I woke before dawn without meaning to, my body sensing something important was about to happen. I dressed in the dark, pulling on layers because Clara had warned me the mornings were cold. I walked outside and the world was caught in that space between night and day, when everything looks blue and unfinished. The air was so cold I could see my breath. It smelled like sage and dust and something wild I could not name. I started walking toward the canyon trail, my footsteps loud on the gravel path, and with every step I felt a little more real, a little more present, a little more like someone who deserved to take up space. The canyon at sunrise was not something I had words for. I had seen pictures, of course, in all those magazine clippings and travel brochures, but pictures could not capture the scale of it, the way it made you feel small and significant at the same time. The rocks glowed orange and pink and gold colors I did not know existed outside of paintings. The sky stretched so wide and empty that it made my chest ache. I stood at the edge of a viewpoint, alone except for one other hiker in the distance, and I understood why people came here to find themselves. The canyon did not care who you were or who you had been. It simply was, had been for millions of years, would be for millions more. And your smallness in comparison was somehow comforting. I stayed there until the sun was fully up and the colors faded into the harsh light of day. My legs were stiff from standing still for so long. My face was cold and probably red. But I felt awake in a way I had not felt in years, maybe ever. I walked back to the guest house slowly, taking my time, noticing things I would have rushed past before. The way the light hit the rocks at different angles, the lizards darting across the path, the tiny flowers growing in impossible places, the silence that was not empty but full of its own kind of music. Clara was setting out breakfast when I returned. Coffee and pastries and fruit she arranged on a long table where guests could serve themselves. She asked how my morning was, and I tried to explain but the words felt insufficient. She just nodded like she understood anyway and poured me coffee. I sat with a few other guests. A couple in their 70s who had been coming here for 20 years. A young man with expensive camera equipment who was working on a photography project. A woman about my age traveling with her sister, both of them recently divorced and figuring out what came next. We did not talk much, but there was a comfort in the shared silence, in being among people who were also searching for something they could not name. Over the next few days, I fell into a rhythm I had not expected to find. I woke early and hiked until my legs ached, and my lungs burned from the altitude. I sat on rocks and watched the light change, watched shadows move across the canyon like living things. I ate meals alone and did not apologize for taking up space at a table meant for two. I read books I had been meaning to read for years. Books David had never been interested in, so I had put them aside. I wrote in a journal I bought at a gift shop, filling pages with thoughts I had been too afraid to think before. I learned that I liked my coffee black. I learned that I was stronger than I thought. I learned that being alone was not the same as being lonely. But it was not all peaceful revelation. There were hard moments too. Moments when I called Emma and got her voicemail and felt the sting of distance, of not knowing how to bridge the gap that had grown between us. Moments when I saw couples hiking together, the man steadying his wife on the steep parts, and I felt David's absence like a physical wound. Moments when I woke in the middle of the night and panicked, my heart racing, wondering what I was doing here so far from everything I knew, everything that was safe. In those moments, I had to remind myself that growth is uncomfortable, that becoming someone new means leaving someone old behind, and that you cannot outrun grief, but you can carry it differently. One afternoon, I joined a guided hike with a group of strangers. The guide was a woman in her 40s named Sarah, who talked about the geology and history of the canyon, with the kind of passion that made rocks sound like poetry. She explained how the canyon was formed over millions of years by water and wind, by forces so slow and persistent they seemed gentle until you saw what they had accomplished. She said the most beautiful things in nature are created by patience and pressure. I thought about my own life, about how I had been worn down by time and responsibility and loss, and I wondered if maybe I was being carved into something beautiful too, even if I could not see it yet. We stopped at an overlook, and Sarah pointed out the different layers of rock, each one representing millions of years of history. She said you could read the earth like a book if you knew how to look. I stared at those ancient layers and thought about the layers of my own life. The girl I had been before marriage, the young mother who had given up dreams for diapers and school lunches, the wife who had slowly disappeared into her husband's shadow, the widow standing here now, trying to remember who she was underneath all those accumulated years. Toward the end of the trip, I met a woman named Rose at the guest house. She was 68, silver-haired and sun-weathered, with laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she had not let life make her bitter. She was traveling alone after her husband had left her for someone younger. She said it with such matter-of-fact calmness that I almost missed the pain underneath, the wound that had scarred over but not completely healed. We sat on the porch one evening, while the sky turned pink and purple, and we talked about our lives in the way women do when they recognize something familiar in each other. She told me she had been traveling for 6 months, moving from place to place, staying nowhere long enough to get comfortable. She said that at first it felt like running away, but somewhere along the road it started feeling like running towards something. She said she was beginning to remember who she was before she became someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's anything. She said the hardest part was not the leaving but the staying gone, resisting the pull to go back to what was familiar even when familiar was slowly killing you. I told her about David, about the 8 months of grief and silence and slowly disappearing. I told her about the cereal aisle, and the folder of dreams, and the terrifying moment I had booked a flight to a place I could not pronounce. She listened without offering platitudes or solutions, just nodding in the places where words were not necessary. Before she left the next morning, Rose hugged me tight and said something I have never forgotten. She said that leaving your comfort zone is not about finding adventure. It is about finding yourself. Adventure is just what happens when you are brave enough to look. On my last day, I woke before sunrise whinle time and hiked to my favorite viewpoint at the canyon's edge. The sky was clear and full of stars that were just beginning to fade into the approaching dawn. I stood there in the cold and thought about everything that had brought me here, the grief that had hollowed me out, the loneliness that had made me invisible, the fear that had kept me small, the quiet desperation of a life half-lived. I thought about David and how much I missed him, but also how much I was beginning to miss the woman I used to be before I became his wife, before I became anyone's anything. And then I thought about the future, about where I might go next, about what else I might discover if I kept moving forward instead of backward. The sun broke over the horizon, and the canyon flooded with light, and I understood something I had not understood before. You do not leave your comfort zone to escape your life. You leave it to claim your life back. I returned home 2 weeks later, but I was not the same woman who had left. The plane touched down in familiar weather, and I collected my suitcase from the same baggage claim, and I took a taxi down the same streets to the same house. But when I walked through the door, the silence did not suffocate me anymore. The emptiness did not feel like failure. I walked through the rooms and saw them differently now, not as a shrine to the past, but as a starting point for the future. I spent the next few days making changes, small ones at first. I packed up David's clothes and donated them to a shelter where they might actually help someone instead of just gathering dust in my closet. I rearranged the furniture, moving the couch away from the television, and toward the window where light came in. I threw out the dead tomato plants David had loved, and planted flowers instead, bright ones in colors I chose because I liked them, not because they matched anything or served any purpose beyond making me happy. Emma called that Sunday like always, and when she asked how I was, I told her the truth. I told her I was good. I told her I was different. There was a long pause, and then she said she could hear it in my voice. She said I sounded like myself again. I did not tell her that I was not sure I had ever known who that was until now. We talked longer than usual, and the conversation did not feel like an obligation. She asked about the trip, and I told her about the canyon and the sunrise and Rose, and the moment I realized being alone was different from being lonely. She was quiet for a while, and then she said she was proud of me. I cried after we hung up, but they were good tears this time. I started planning my next trip. Not someday. Not eventually. But soon. I wanted to see mountains. I wanted to walk through cities where no one spoke my language. I wanted to get lost and find my way back. I wanted to keep discovering that the world was bigger than I had let myself believe, and that I still had time to see it. I pinned a map on my kitchen wall and marked the places I wanted to go with red pins, and every morning I looked at it while drinking my coffee and felt something I had not felt in years. Hope, possibility. The electric anticipation of a life still being written. People still looked at me with concern sometimes. My friends asked if I was going through a phase. My neighbor Mrs. Patterson told me I should be careful about traveling alone at my age, as if staying home and slowly fading away was somehow safer. Maybe they were right to worry. Maybe I was going through a crisis. But it was the kind of crisis that saves you, not the kind that breaks you. It was the crisis of waking up and realizing you have been asleep for decades, and deciding that however much time you have left, you are going to spend it awake. I think about that morning at the canyon often. I think about standing at the edge with the whole world stretched out before me, realizing that I had been standing at edges my whole life, but had never been brave enough to look over. I think about how scared I was, how my hands shook and my breath came short and every instinct told me to turn back. I think about how I did it anyway, and how that moment of courage changed everything that came after. Now when I sit at my kitchen table, I do not feel invisible. I do not feel hollow. I drink my coffee black and look at the map pinned to my wall, full of red pins marking places I want to go, and I feel something I have not felt in years. I feel alive. I feel like myself. Not the self I was before David died, not even the self I was before we got married, but a self I am still discovering, still becoming, still learning to recognize in the mirror. I understand now that leaving your comfort zone is not a single act of bravery. It is a practice, a daily decision to choose growth over safety, possibility over certainty, yourself over the version of yourself that everyone else needs you to be. Some days it is easy. Some days I wake up and book a flight without hesitation. Other days I wake up and the old fear is back, the voice that says stay home, stay small, stay safe. But I have learned to recognize that voice for what it is now. Not wisdom, not caution. Just fear dressed up as common sense. And I finally understand that adventure is not about where you go or what you do, or how far you travel from home. Adventure is about having the courage to go at all. To walk out the door when everyone says stay. To board the plane when your hands are shaking. To stand at the edge of something vast and beautiful and terrifying and refuse to look away. That is the adventure. Everything else is just geography. I am 53 years old, and I am just beginning to learn who I am. That is not a tragedy. That is a gift, because it means I still have time. Time to discover what I like, what I want, who I might become if I stop trying to be who everyone else needs me to be. Time to see mountains and oceans and cities with unpronounceable names. Time to sit on rocks and watch the light change. Time to be alone and learn the difference between loneliness and solitude. Time to find adventure, not out there in the world, but in here, in the quiet brave act of becoming myself. The house is still quiet. David's chair is still empty. My children still have their own lives that do not revolve around me. None of that has changed. But I have changed, and that makes all the difference.